Joining us live now is Centre Alliance Senator and key crossbencher Rex Patrick. Rex, thank you for your time.
Good morning.
Now, you've been making some noise in the Senate this week. We'll get to this motion you're moving about releasing the Gaetjens report into sports rorts later today. But firstly, you've been naming and shaming some CEOs in the Senate.
Oh, look, I did make a speech in the Senate last night talking about one particular CEO, and I won't go into the details there. But we have a situation in Australia, and tax transparency data tells us this. There are 221 companies that earn more than $100 million per annum who have, over the last 5 years, not paid any tax at all. The total revenue of these 221 companies is $850 billion. And not a cent of tax paid. And it's my strong view that we now have to start looking at the people who are running these companies. Are they operating ethically? Are they operating with social integrity and proper licence? So I intend to, over the coming months, to call out some of these CEOs and basically state what I think about their conduct.
What do you think it's going to really achieve at the end of the day with naming and shaming these CEOs?
Well, I want CEOs to think about the way in which they direct their company, the way in which they structure their companies. All of these companies utilise our health system for their workers. They rely on the education system for their workers. They rely on the police to keep their buildings safe. They rely on the infrastructure, the roads that lead to their facilities. Yet they are not contributing a brass razoo to that. They're placing the burden on that on everyday mum and dad taxpayers, and that's not right.
You mentioned, are they acting ethically? Isn't the only question, are they acting legally?
No, we should always operate legally, but we have an obligation to be moral in the way in which we conduct our business, and that includes, everyone in their capacity. We don't simply look at the law. The distinction between law and moral is in some sense grey.
We're talking about tax deductions that are available. I mean, have you ever turned down a tax deduction in your personal income tax and thought, look, I'm going pretty well this year, I won't take that deduction?
Oh, look, I've always filled in a tax return on the advice of an accountant, noting what I can and can't.
And they get everything that you can, don't they?
Well, there's nothing wrong with making sure that you are not paying tax on things that you don't have to. That's quite appropriate.
Isn't that what the companies are doing?
But I don't spend millions and millions of dollars engaging advisory companies to work out how to avoid or evade paying tax.
If we move on to what's happening in the Senate later today, you're pulling quite an extraordinary move, which could see Matthias Cormann sidelined in his role, demanding this report. Oh,
look, the Senate made a call for the report produced by the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet into the sports rorts affair. The government responded with a very weak public interest immunity, and the Senate has not accepted that immunity. And all that's happening now is the Senate is exercising its power to sanction the government if they don't comply with orders of the Senate. They have to respect the fact that we have an oversight responsibility. That responsibility is enshrined in the Constitution. It's our job. So the argument being put forward is that the convention is that they don't have to release these reports, but there is evidence that they have done so in the past. They take a particular view with a particular bias. There's no question, both in Senate practices, in ODGES, which is our guidelines, but also in legal proceedings, and Egan and Chadwick is one example in the New South Wales Appeal Court that makes it absolutely clear that the Senate is entitled to make a call for documents to allow it to inform itself as to whether or not the government has acted properly in any circumstance, whether it be in development of policy, in the spending of taxpayers' money, and the Senate has powers to sanction if the government doesn't comply.
What's your sense on Barnaby Joyce here? He's often referred to as a very decent and reasonable person to deal with by the crossbenchers. Is he caught between a rock and a hard place here? Does he have much of an argument to come back to you with when you say, well, this is why I'm supporting this?
Oh, sorry, you're talking about Matthias Cormann,
yes.
not Barnaby?
Matthias Cormann.
Yeah, sorry.
I said Barnaby Joyce.
Did I?
Yeah, I was like, geez, what story are we going to now?
So,
Got Barnaby on the brain, obviously.
look, Matthias is the captain of the government ship in the Senate, and he will bear responsibility for this, and particularly noting he is the minister representing the Prime Minister. Look, in some sense, there's a reluctance. I really like Matthias. I get on with him well, but this is not a personal thing. It's about the Senate saying you have to comply with orders for production. You have to comply with the law.
And the precedent is that they released the report into Julia Bishop and Christopher Pyne in their post-political career roles. So is this them just picking and choosing the ones that suit them?
Well, it is, and it disturbs me that there is a governance committee of cabinet where you can wheel in these sorts of documents about governance issues and hide behind the doctrine of cabinet incompetence. That in itself is bizarre and perverse. If we're dealing with governance issues, you've got to do it in the open. It's got to be transparent. Everyone's got to be able to see what's going on. That is the disinfectant.
Does all of your party support this motion this afternoon?
Yes, my colleague Sterling will be supporting the motion.
And you've got all the crossbenchers on board, Labor.
Yes, and that's perhaps one of the unusual things about this. And I know Senator Wong has carefully considered this. She made a statement about that in the chamber. It is, in some sense, a strong move. It's not the strongest one the Senate can make. The Senate can do everything from removing privileges of a minister in the Senate to removing a senator or a minister from attending the Senate, other than for divisions, right through to stopping voting for any legislation. Now, they're quite extreme measures, and I'm not suggesting that would take that would occur in this circumstance. But at some point, the Senate has to stand up and say, enough is enough, government. You're too opaque, and you've got to change your practices.
This is unprecedented, though, isn't it?
Look, certainly the situation where Senator Cormann will be required to move back to the front bench instead of standing at the table where he normally does. That's a visual sanction rather than a practical sanction. But of course, someone else will have to represent the Prime Minister in the Senate as well. It's a measured response to the government's failure to be transparent.
I hope he doesn't ping a hamstring going back and forward all day. You might feel bad.
Well, we'll always give any senator that needs medical attention that attention.
Rex Patrick, as always, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, coming up after